Hey, you're listening to Soul Games, the podcast.
Where we explore new ways to enjoy the game of life with a touch more soul.
And a lot of fun.
So let's play.
Shall we? Welcome to Soul Games, the podcast. I'm so excited about this episode. I couldn't be more excited
Me too.
about this episode. Obviously, we have my co-host, Emily Capshaw, but we have a Dr.
hey.
Hillary McBride joining us today.
In the house.
In the house.
It's so good to be with you. I'm so
Oh my
happy to
God.
be here. We have been waiting for this for so long. A
I know.
lifetime, maybe.
This
lifetime.
is the only moment that we have, and I couldn't be happier. So
Likewise.
we're calling this one All the Feels, which, all the feels. I love that I love that conversation. I love the topic. I love it all. Hillary, for those of you who listened to the podcast before, she's been on the podcast. It was maybe my favorite conversation in the entire last 2 years of the podcast. I don't know if you know that, Hillary, but that is true.
Thank you, Brady.
I still have people that tell me about how impactful that episode was, becoming friendly with pain and ourselves. If you don't know Hillary, she is a therapist, researcher, speaker, and writer. She's based out of Victoria, British Columbia, Vancouver Island. I've been to her house. It's a lovely place to take a walk around the island. She helps you see people grow, heal, change, and come to more fullness in themselves and their relationships. She holds a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of British Columbia. Basically, she's one of the smartest people I know in the entire world. And she's skilled at using a wide variety of therapeutic approaches, a few that she's actually tried on me through various points in our friendship, including AEDP, attachment work, depth-oriented psychotherapy, I don't know what that is, IFS, parts work, psychedelic somatic therapy, feminist approaches, EMDR, and so many more. Anyway, that is the intro of Hillary. And at any point, Hillary, just on an ethical standpoint, we can let you know that you have permission to try some of those weird research-based approaches if you want to, as we're leaning into this conversation around feelings. And with that, I will lead into the conversation. How's everybody's feelings today?
Is that a question you normally ask, or is that
how
is
are your
that topic
feelings? I actually
How
ask
you
it.
feels?
I'll be at a party, and it'll be like a random group of people or something, and I'll just like sit down and go, "How's everybody's feelings?"
incredible?
I love
Which
that.
people are like, I'm not used to being asked that. I'm not used to knowing.
I know,
What
and
do
I'm
I do
like,
with that
Where do you
question?
feel that in your body right now?
Listen, I've
Casually.
said that too many times at parties, and I'm like, wait, stop it.
It's beautiful,
So
Brady.
good.
You're just giving it away. What works for
Aw.
you, you're handing out. You're like the boy with the 2 loaves and the fishes and the.
I'm
Yeah.
just a boy with a slightly anxious attachment style, leaning into a moment, try to feel connected.
I love it. I love it. Well, how are both of you feeling? I'm so curious to know. Since you asked.
I'm feeling pretty good today, which is great news these days. I've been in a hard chapter of life, a lot of change, a lot of endings, relationship endings, and moving, and just a lot of transition. And so I've been moving through some deep grief these past couple months, and so I'm at one of those chapters in life where any day where I'm like, I feel good today is like such a win. And so today I'm feeling pretty great, which is wonderful. Grateful for it.
Yes, I'm celebrating with you that sweet pocket of ease.
Yeah.
Also, Hillary, can you just be like our host all the time? Like, you just come on and go, "How are you feeling? How are
Well,
you
yeah,
doing?"
you
It's-
asked. You
It's so
asked. I'm just
beautiful.
following your lead. Thank you,
Oh,
Brady.
no, I'm feeling good, and I feel excited. I feel a little nervous. I feel a little scared. But I just have, my body is vibrating. And I'm remembering moments that we've had together, and I feel like this tenderness inside of my chest, and I can feel like my eyes kind of water, and Yeah. So this is really meaningful to me.
Mm.
How are you, Hillary?
Oh, I'm just riding the wave of that
Mm-hmm.
energy and that meaning and tenderness. I felt like I got drawn right into that with you as you shared that, Brady. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That actually feels really soothing for me.
Mm-hmm.
I have been coming off a very difficult morning where it felt like some really, really hard things happened. And I felt myself both like rattled and reaching for my stability internally and externally. Like when we feel those, the shocks go through our worlds and our bodies that kind of have us feel a little unsteady. I also have parts in me that say, and here's what's true about you. And so I can feel all of that kind of happening inside. And I'm just noticing that as you share that with me, I feel more connected to who I am and I feel more settled and grounded. So thank you for what you shared, Brady. That felt, yeah, that felt right and helpful for how I'm learning.
Hillary has been one of the all-star Soul Games program experts throughout the last number of years, and she's helped support us. And one of the things she's really helped us in is like learning how to communicate compassionately and in touch with one's heart and acknowledging what is happening inside someone as a way to both show up authentically and also dive into deeper connection. And we could go there, but I'm going to steer us back into feelings. Like what are even emotions? Like if you're going to dive into the beginning of this episode as far as giving us a basic understanding of emotions, like I grew up in a world where, it said don't trust your feelings. Like don't trust everything you feel, right? Like feelings, the heart is deceitfully wicked and like all these kind of things that were said, and we don't need to go super into that, but kind of like what even are emotions? Like,
Yes.
what is this?
Well, let me say before I talk about emotions that I appreciate the journey it's taken for you to get to the point where you want to know, given how demonized and pathologized they were, like the arc of your story that has you even wanting to ask feels like, wow, what a journey to take. I'm thinking of all the healing that you've done to create space where you're curious about something that you were told is dangerous. Like there's a lot of change that has to happen for that.
There's a lot of suffering that has to happen for that to happen.
Growing, healing, integrating, adapting. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
When I think about emotions, I mean, there's so many different intersections of ways of presenting this that come to mind. But the first is to think about it kind of mechanistically. And then I can talk about it in terms of socially, relationally, experientially. Emotion is energy, right? It's energy that kind of like everything else or every other kind of energy in the world has a waveform to it. It comes up, it moves, it's meant to put us into motion, which is why we often think of emotions as emotion, energy in motion. It's this process that our body has from the get-go. It's wired into us to move us to action, to make things right, to help us flourish, to help us grow, to bring us into alignment, to communicate to those around us that we need something or that we're doing great and we want them to join us in the celebration and the flourishing. So it's energy with a purpose to move us in some way. It exists in our bodies, right? Many of us think of emotions as the names we give them. If we can even do that, I would say that that's kind of advanced culturally to be able to know what you're feeling and name it accurately. But to recognize that emotion is a body process is like one step further than many of us are familiar with or comfortable with, or even we can kind of know that in an abstracted cerebral way. But what does the emotion actually do in our bodies and how do we stay with it and feel that action tendency that's rising in us? That's a skill. And the reason why that skill is hard for many of us is because emotions are social. So you heard me say like they're energy moving in us, in our bodies that is meant to communicate to those around us what it's like to be us, what we need. But if you think about how we develop and how plastic our nervous systems are, when we have a feeling growing up, and we are also told that that feeling, which is biologically hardwired into us, good, helpful, needs to be discerned, needs some skills, some strategy to stay with, that it's going to cut us off from connection. And connection is actually a primary survival need. it often puts us in this really difficult place of having to decide. And I would say in a totally unconscious, neurocepted way, not a conscious cerebral process of, articulating to oneself to shut off from a part of oneself. But we end up feeling this decision of, do I stay connected to me and what I feel, or do I stay connected to you? When being connected to you is actually how I get my needs met and how I belong. Again, if emotions are meant to be for us and for our community, again, emotions highlight just how important belonging and connection is for our survival. So we get into this kind of conundrum, and not knowing how to be with our feelings, feeling overwhelmed by them, assuming that they're going to cut us off from the people that we love, that they're actually going to make us do dangerous things, that they're going to, as you alluded to, Brady, contribute to eternal conscious torment. Right? Makes a pretty compelling case, both consciously and unconsciously, that we should stay away from these because they are dangerous and damaging. And then as a result, what happens is we don't know how to be with them. Like, they don't go away just because we're told that they're bad. They don't stop moving in us, right? Even if someone tells you, like, your emotions are sinful, your body is bad. Yeah. I liken it as an autonomic process to be totally akin to other autonomic processes like breathing and pupil dilation and blinking and swallowing. Like, you cannot make it stop, even if people around you tell you that it's shameful or bad. And so we develop all of these strategies to try to inhibit what's naturally happening. Like, if I was to say to you, swallowing, I mean, it sounds totally ridiculous when I say this, but swallowing is sinful. It's bad. It's going to disconnect you from everyone you love. It actually hurts you. You cannot trust it. Think of all of the ways that you're going to try to get around that autonomic process. Or blinking, right? Like, if someone told you you couldn't do that and your very survival depended on not doing it, you get pretty creative at trying to figure out some way around it. And so we call those ways around feeling defenses. Sometimes our defenses are other feelings that are more acceptable to other people. Sometimes our defenses are behavior, but they're anything we do to not when we've been told that feeling is dangerous or scary.
Man, I'm already feeling all the feels just listening to this. I'm like, oh my God.
What's happening? Can I hear what's coming up?
I feel like the stuff that's like hitting me the most and hearing you say all that is all the stuff around the idea of connection and just thinking about emotions moving us into something. Because I feel like a lot of times in myself, when I'm feeling an emotion that might be deemed as negative or a difficult emotion to really be with, I feel like my instinct is to try to just get it to stop, be like, oh, what do I do to get this to stop as quickly as possible? And as someone who tends to be on the more avoidant attachment side of things, typically, my mind just goes straight into like, what can I do alone within myself to manage this? And so it's really been a new concept for me to think about. Maybe I could get support from someone else in this. Maybe this emotion is moving me into that to create an opportunity for connection. Like, that's such a new concept for me. And I'm really currently trying to figure out how to practice that. So that's that's hitting for me.
Oh, I'm so appreciating how difficult that is when we're used to being with things alone. Like, we actually say about each emotion each emotion inside of us has different receptive affective capacity, which is just a way of saying, like, I might be able to feel anger all on my own. Yeah. But feeling anger while I'm connected to you is a totally different skill. And my anger might have no idea how to let you into it. Yeah. But you could say joy, like, oh, maybe something inside of me is like, I don't want to feel joy alone. I can go out and celebrate. I can party with my friends. I can do something that feels expansive with other people, because maybe joy has a different receptive affective capacity. Like, oh, it doesn't feel threatening for me to feel joy with you. Or maybe it does, right? And I think that's where it's helpful to look at these specific experiences that we've had, because it's actually a skill to feel with somebody else.
Yeah. And my instinct is always to go hide and deal with it in private alone. Definitely.
Oh, yeah. It's so much safer there, right? Like, there's obviously drawbacks, which is why you're working on this and why we don't want to be alone in it. But I definitely understand the utility of that, especially if we've been hurt in connection, like, to stay connected to what we feel without the threat that comes with the exposure of closeness. Like, it's kind of amazing that we can do that.
Or worrying
Right,
more
like, we
about
have
how the
actually
other
so many
one
options.
is feeling rather than your
Of
own feelings. Now
course,
it's like
yes.
caretaking for them.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious about, Brady and I were having a conversation the other day about, like, we both have some strong feelings about the relationship between thoughts and emotions, and this idea that your thoughts, I've heard a lot people talk about your thoughts create your emotions. And I'm curious to hear you speak a little bit on that relationship between the two, and kind of this chicken or the egg thing of, like, are our thoughts creating our emotions? Are emotions creating our thoughts? Like, how does that impact the way that we approach our emotions?
Absolutely.
And just
Yes.
to pop in a little bit about this.
Yes, let's hear it.
I saw an Instagram post the other day, in some of the self-help world, that somebody said, freedom is not believing your thoughts. And I think there's a part of me that understands what they're trying to say. And then there's a part of me that got really angry, that I was like, anyway. So there's a lot of don't believe the story. Anyway, I get really angry. So give us the truth.
Yes,
Hillary, give us the truth.
Okay. No pressure here to be the authority on affective neuroscience. Okay, I'll do my best to represent the field.
Well, in this group, you win. You're definitely the authority in this group.
Well, let's see if we can figure it out together. I'll toss some stuff back to you, and we'll see how it lands. I would say that as far as the affective neuroscientific evidence about thought relationship interaction, the debate has been resolved. So I can tell you that the chicken egg conundrum, at least as it concerns this function of our natural processes, is that thoughts come out of more subcortical structures that are responsible for the experience of being us, in a kind of non-linguistic pre-verbal way. So we have experiences of being us that what we would call before thought, that exist in our body, that exist in our felt sense of connection between us, and that exist in the memory of what it's like to be us in the world that we carry with us up into this moment. And it's actually from those subcortical structures that hold memory and sense and connection and perception that projection up into the thinking cortical structures of our brain happen, which result in those specific thoughts emerging. But because there is no delineation between one part of us, like there is actually no distinction between brain and body, or mind and self, or me and you, right? What we know is that when something gets projected up into the cortical structures, that it would make sense if we would have a reaction to it, because some parts of our thinking selves don't actually know that the thoughts that we have aren't real. What we think we experience in some way as being an expression of our reality. And so we could have a thought that comes from a felt sense, but then because we have that thought, we have a reaction to it. We go, oh, that's painful, right? It's almost like the thought becomes a new stimuli, which results in us having an emotional reaction, which then might create that subcortical experience that creates more projections up into our cortical structures, resulting in more thoughts. And when you do that dance enough times, there become these loops that become unconscious in a way, that even though there is a thought and a feeling, it starts to happen on a kind of instinctual level. But what's really cool about that is you can have multiple loops of that nature active at the same time, which means that they can interact. So I can have a thought that moves from a sad feeling into, or I should say, I could have a loop that moves from a sad feeling into a sad thought and back again. But I can also have another loop that can reflect on that first loop and go, oh, that's interesting that sad feeling is making me think all those sad things. And we can have metacognition. We can think about the thinking and think about the feeling in a way that helps us perhaps slow that process down, notice where the thought is coming from, and do something different with the emotion, which is why emotion features so heavily in so many of the therapies that are really creating, profound change in people, because we can do something different with the emotion by bringing connection in, by helping us resolve that arc, right? If that action tendency that the emotion wants to take gets to actually do what it's meant to do, instead of us moving into a thought about the feeling, then it's possible for us to change that loop. Brady, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just trying to put what you just said in like my understanding because you said a lot of big words. Were you basically saying that we experience life, and as our experience of life happens, there are different sensations that happen in the body, sort of precognitive, and out of that come emotions and thoughts and experiences. So in some sense, an emotion is pre-thought, or a sensation and emotion is pre-thought, and then that creates oftentimes a thought experience. And if one cannot be with the sensation, it feels too overwhelming in the body, then oftentimes we as humans develop defense strategies to try to deal with the overwhelm in our body, and we kind of go up from head to heart to head and kind of loop again. Is that sort of what you were kind of saying?
Yeah, let me give you an example of this. Let's just imagine that I had an experience that left me feeling crushed. I felt rejected. I felt judged. I felt crushed. Even that narrative of it being a rejection, an experience of being crushed, a judgment, is actually a thought about something underneath it, right? So if I was to go underneath that thought of it, what I might find is one of these core emotional experiences that are in every one of us, that are inborn into our bodies from the get-go. And maybe it would feel a little bit more like sadness than anger, but maybe there's a little bit of anger in there. But what's interesting about if I was to just stay with crushed, judged, rejected, right? And that's the story that I'm telling myself about it. That's the thought. It ends up creating a new experience for me wherein there's actually more hurt than the original experience. There's like, now there's the interpretation of that's what was going on. And there's a whole feeling about what it means that this person rejected and judged me. So if what we can do is recognize what's happening in our bodies, which tends to live in that kind of pre-thought place, ideally what we can do is we can simplify the process and not muddy the emotion with so much of our interpretation about it, which creates more of the pain that we're probably feeling. So what that might mean is me going, okay, what's underneath that story of judged, crushed, rejected? Okay, sad, right? Grief, maybe there's a sense of loneliness. Okay, what does that sad feel like inside of me? And it might come with some energy, like, we don't think of sad as energizing, but it has a process. And maybe that feels like, oh, my body kind of wants to collapse. I feel heavy. And is there something that the sadness wants, right? Is it moving me towards something? Well, actually, it would feel really good to be nurtured, held, soothed, comforted in some way. I actually want to have the experience of softening and getting like pulled down into this feeling, but knowing that I'm going to be met on the ride. And what's fascinating about going in that direction is notice how different it is than I am rejected, I am crushed, I am judged, to say, oh, there is something inside of me that hurts and what it wants is to be cared for, which ironically is the actual kind of opposite of what created the injury. It's like if we stay with the emotion process, it provides this homeostatic self-correcting mechanism of our body taking us in the direction of the very thing that we need that remedied would cause the pain. But we can't get there if we stay up in the story about it. It's really hard for us to get connected to what the medicine is when we leave our experience. We leave the experience in our body of what the feeling is like.
That's really interesting. I feel like there's been this narrative I've been hearing a lot, even more recently, about the subconscious and trying to like rewire it or change it or like work with it in some way. And I've noticed for me recently, there's been a sort of shift in the way that I perceive that, or the goal of trying to change that precognitive space, and actually learning, like, can I trust this? Can I trust these sensations and these instincts of my subconscious, and instead just be kind of like you're saying, observing the story that I'm creating about what's happening in that sensation. And for me personally, it's really felt like such a relief to consider the possibility of like, can I trust my own subconscious instead of trying to like change it all the time? And so as you're talking about that, it's just yeah, it's bringing more clarity to why that's been the experience in my own body of what I've felt, the relief of like this pre-cerebral sensation or whatever's happening. Like, instead of trying to rewire it or change it or make it different, can I just be curious about what it's inviting me into without
Yes.
making too much of a story about it?
Yeah. Well, you highlighted two of my favorite clinical skills in what I would call like spiritual practices. One of them is curiosity and wonder. I actually think that curiosity and wonder are medicines against the rigidity and the certainty and the judgment that we carry for ourselves and each other and our processes. So I think that there's something really beautiful about going, can I just be curious about this? But I think the other piece in it that I'm hearing you allude to as well is, how does it make sense that I feel this way? Or what about this tells me something of interest to me? Like, whenever I'm trying to be with myself, and this has been a journey for me too, of learning how to feel, and I'm still very much actively working on learning these skills. My favorite way of approaching myself right now is based on what I've been through. How does it make sense that I feel this way or think that thought, right? Even if it's too much to get underneath the thought to notice the emotion, maybe we say, if the thought is a reflection of my internal process and not necessarily actually what's happening around, but it tells me something about what it's been like to be me, what does it tell me about what it's been like to be me? The reason that thought that I have, is possibly because that's happened to me before, that someone actually did such and such and such. And my brain body system has taken that into consideration as a possibility, as a loop that I could run inside of myself, that, someone would reject or judge or crush me. Like, oh, that has happened. And so no wonder that's the thought that my nervous system is serving up. So if we could approach this as a way of learning more about ourselves too, again, the instinct is not necessarily to change, but to understand, to be curious about. And ultimately, I think what that tends to do is it short circuits another loop that we can get into, right? It's like, if we can have this one loop that goes from experience to thought, there's often a metacognitive loop around that. I can't believe I'm doing this again. What's wrong with me? Why can't I fix this? I can't believe I'm here again, or whatever it is, the story that we're reaching for. But if we could add in curiosity or add in wonder, or even say to ourselves, okay, there's a reason why this is the place that I go. What is that? What does that tell me about myself? I think it's one of the hooks back into wonder and curiosity.
Hillary, I was thinking about a moment that I had a few months ago where, in this moment, kind of indirectly speaks to your impact on my life, and sort of how I experienced it. But I was walking by someone's house who was very dear to me for a long time, and who I'm not really in relationship with in a consistent way at the moment. And I started to feel this deep sadness overcome my chest. And I was in the middle of something, and so I was like, oh, I got to go do this. And sort of there was a moment I had to move on from that feeling, and I drove home and I got into my apartment. And when I got there, I sort of forgotten what had happened. And I was like kind of in this funk, and I was like, wow, like what is happening inside of me? And then I had a flashback of having that moment of looking down at this house and this person. And I put my hand in my chest. I started to feel really sad. And instead of, I could feel the sort of the moment where I go into sort of a rejection story or an abandonment sort of experience. But I heard your words in the back of my head that said, oftentimes sadness lets us know what really matters to us. It tells us what was really meaningful, sort of what touched us in a profound way. And when I said that I was able to be with the loss and the sadness in a way that it actually turned into delight. And I thought, wow, it's so beautiful to feel so deeply for someone rather than feel the pain of rejection and loss. And I think maybe that's speaking to sort of the thing that you've laid out in the last number of minutes. And in the midst of feeling something fully, and also possibly like having a cognitive experience where you can lean more into the beautiful, fully felt experience of that sensation and sort of understanding at the same time.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that story, like, oh, this tells me what matters to me, allowed you to trust the sadness enough that you could turn towards it, like that there could be something good in it. And I think that there are these little hooks for each of the primary kind of central emotions that can do that for us, but we're not taught them. Like no one hands us this manual when we're a kid and says, well, I mean, not no one, like hopefully it's changing now. And I'm trying to do it differently with my daughter. And I know that lots of other people are trying to do it too when they have more emotional literacy. But I know that many of us in our generation did not get told, oh, your sadness is actually this doorway to love. Right? Sadness is a doorway to closeness and meaning. So you can trust it because it'll take you, if you follow it, right, it'll take you into what matters to you. And we were not told about anger. Anger says something is worth protecting. Anger says you matter and someone else matters. And it's time to get clear so you can make change so that things are right. And we were not told, right, that disgust is a way of us saying our bodies have this incredible instinct about what is toxic to us as a person and our systems. We were not taught that joy is essential to feel in connection, but that when we stay with joy, it actually gives us motivation. It inoculates us against depression, inoculates us against dissociation. Same with desire. Like desire tells you what you want. Desire is about you. It is for you. It organizes your identity. When you experience desire, you know more about who you are. And that is a good thing because you are good. What comes from you is good. What you want is good and you can trust it. There's so much about each emotion that if we were told growing up, oh, right, you have sexual arousal, what a beautiful thing. What does it tell you about what makes you feel alive? What your yes is, what you are for, what you want, what makes you feel like you are going to expand in the world. Oh, you have disgust? Ugh. Let's look at how amazing it is that our bodies tell us that doesn't feel good. I want to get away from that. Get that thought, that behavior, that practice, get that as far away from me as possible because it's going to erode my integrity and our integrity as a community.
We have a poet on our hands, y'all. That was so beautiful.
Yes, so gorgeous.
Hey, really quick, because I felt tingles in my body as you were sharing all that. It was so touching to me. And of the 7 core emotions in sort of the AEDP theory, you touched on 5 of them. And so anger, sadness, disgust, arousal or desire, and joy. And then there's 2 more, the fear. And excitement. Could you do the little piece about fear and excitement as well?
I would love to do that. Yep. So fear is our body's way of mobilizing to get us away from what is dangerous or to give us the energy that we need to be alert, to be awake, to be paying attention, and ultimately to get out of danger to protect us. And excitement, similar to joy, right, is about us actually having motivation, right? Joy is different because joy says to us, you've done something has happened that felt good. Let's let it feel good as long as we can and share it, give it away, smile at someone, expand your body. Like it's about fullness. And excitement tends to be the mobilization tendency to take us towards things that are going to make us feel joy and give us a sense of satisfaction. And so both excitement and fear, interestingly, have a very similar profile in the body. They come with a lot of energy. Right? It's very easy to confuse them. And it's also very easy to feel them at the same time because they're about moving towards or away or what's about to happen. And if we're safe and if it's like, what's going to, the not knowing. And I just love how amazing it is that our body can feel both at the same time, that we can feel, right? We can feel all of this energy And it can be good, right? It can be so good to feel fear. It can be so good to feel excitement. It can feel so good to feel all of these other feelings if we understand their utility and we know how to work with them. And then, curveball in here to also recognize that sometimes our body lives in a timeless state, which spans past and present and future. And sometimes the feelings that we're having are our body trying to protect us against something that happened in the past that we're reminded of in the present, or that we think is going to happen in the future, which is why it's so useful to have a brain, which also has a sense of time. Like brains are really good, kind of, I would say, executive functioning. Prefrontal cortex is really good at time stamping things and helping us go, no. It's 2023. I'm here. The thing that I'm afraid of, it already happened. It's not happening again right now. Here's what's different about right now. But if we can marry, right, the executive functioning skills that help us understand what time space we're in with the goodness and the awareness of how each emotion is for us and helpful, it feels like, not only can we manage so much of the stuff that makes life more painful and complicated, but I think it brings us more fully into who we are. It brings us more fully into connection, into vitality, into a sense of being at ease inside of ourselves.
Mm. I would love to dive in a little bit about how attachment comes into play with some of this, and specifically in the more kind of complex emotional experiences that can happen that, like, for example, I feel like for a long time in my life, I felt like I had this mastered and I was so good at feeling my feelings. And I'm like, it's simple. You just feel it and let it, ride the wave and it'll come to an end, and like, don't resist it, because then that creates suffering. If you just accept it and feel it, you're good. And that worked for me for a long time. And then these past like 6 months of my life, I feel like it really just leveled up in another layer of intensity of emotional experiences in regards to like abandonment trauma and these attachment wounds that just got me into this anxious place, and then the ending of a relationship and that leading me into this chapter of grief and really grieving in a way that I don't think I ever have before. And some of those emotions of grief, like when I'm in these deep places of grieving or in these like abandonment trauma loops and it feels so intense in my body, those tools like don't seem to work the same way, where I'm like, okay, like accept this and just lean into it, and all of the different practices and everything that I feel like all the tools in my tool belt, just like in those deep, deep states of grieving hard, like it just all goes out the window, I feel like. And there's moments where the grief just feels like it never ends, like it's bottomless. And it's like how I'm like getting emotional as I talk about this because it's so present for me. So I'm going to feel it because that's what we're talking about. So yeah, I'm curious about that. Obviously it's very present, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
What feels so much more important to me than the thoughts right now is really honoring the bigness of this. And Emily, we don't know each other, and yet in this moment, I want to feel so close to you. And I want to make all the space in the world for it to be as big as it needs to be. And I know that that's not what we're doing here, but I'm letting you know like what I want, because I see how much space this is asking for. And everything inside of me wants to give you all of that space. And I know that I'm saying that too, because I know that thinking our way out of these painful places like doesn't give us what we need. It's connection, it's being attuned to, it's having someone to feel with us and say, it's not too much for me. It's not too much for me. So what I'm knowing that I'm wishing for you is that even though there's been this loss of attachment and this loss of connection that was holding you, my longing for you is that there would be other attachments and other connections that could hold you in the midst of the bigness, because grief more than anything, not more than anything, grief is a relational process. It's meant to be felt in connection, like every other feeling. And when we are losing connection, and that's the thing that's creating the grief, we're often met with this hole of aloneness.
Yeah.
That just, right, it can swallow us whole, because it's the relational holding that actually metabolizes that pain. And when we don't have that, it can feel like this continuous loop of, just like you said, more and more and more and more and more and more.
Yeah, that feels like it goes back to what I said earlier of this, like this breakthrough I'm having around, like at a certain point, I'm not equipped to do this on my own anymore.
Of course.
And like there was a while at the early stages of it where I couldn't my body wouldn't even cry. Like I couldn't cry unless I was with someone. And so I was just living in this state of kind of anxiety of just like knowing the emotion was there, but just my body protecting me against it. And then the moment I would be around a trusted person, it was just like, whew, it all came out. But there was a couple months there where I could not feel it by myself.
Wow. I'm so moved to hear you say that, because you introduced yourself earlier as having this more kind of avoidant, dismissive attachment style, and how it's been hard to feel in connection. And yet here you are naming like that's actually something you've learned how to do, that there's people close enough to you that you can access yourself. It's so beautiful. I imagine there's so much work you've done to build those safe relationships.
Well, it's like I've gotten to this point, like I said, of like life bringing these bigger emotions kind of I see as a beautiful gift and an opportunity to kind of push me where I have no choice other than to heal in connection. And so I'm really actively rewiring and relearning this attachment pattern, because my whole life I've been able to get by just doing it on my own, and it's worked for me. And now it's really not working anymore. So I'm like, okay, we gotta try something these ones are too big for me. So it's time to try something else.
And we know, we know that when something is too big for us, I don't want to in any way diminish the bigness of the present moment situation, but I'm also hearing you say that it's reminding you of attachment traumas and abandonment traumas. And so my immediate clinical mind, my clinical mind immediately thinks, oh, I wonder what this pain of the grief and the aloneness reminds you of. And sometimes when we're in the state of it will never end, it's because we are reminded of when we, as a younger version of ourselves, didn't have the development online of the part of our mind that can timestamp things. And it feels timeless, because when we're kids and we're in the bigness of aloneness and grief, it is timeless, right? That part of our brain that says it's been an hour and you're going to feel different and you're going to grow up to be 20 or 30 or 60 or 80 and feel differently. We don't have that on board. We don't have enough life experience to know that the feeling ends. So when we are experiencing the profundity of an emotion in a way that feels timeless and hopeless and despairing, it's usually because what's happening right now is also accessing memory of when we felt it before, and it actually was alone, and it actually was helpless, and it actually did feel like it went on forever. And so it can be helpful to remember that the part of us who learned all of those tools is still there, right? As long as the tools are not defenses. And sometimes it's hard, right? Because we get really good at like coming up with strategies and being like, yeah, this is helping me, but it's also a way of like managing it, or even like a deep breath. Like I'm just shocked at how many times I take a deep breath to get away from a building feeling. And yet everything in my field would tell me taking a breath is a great way to regulate yourself. And emotion regulation is the key to mental health. Meanwhile, I'm over here using a breath to diminish what I'm feeling so I can manage it. But we have our adult selves online available to us. And our adult selves who hold all of our resources are not always connected to the younger versions of us who have the intensity of the terror, of the panic, of the grief, or whatever it is. And so the skill of being able to connect what we do know to be true with the younger version of us who didn't know that. I mean, I think that that's a really significant thing in helping the emotion feel tolerable and having a sense it will end.
Mm-hmm.
Because somewhere inside there is an adult who knows no person can feel this much grief this way forever.
Yeah.
Right? There is a self in there who knows, especially if I feel it, and especially if I feel it with other people, right? It won't, it will shift. It won't stay this way forever. So we can put the part of us who feels hopeless back into the younger version of us, who likely actually didn't get what they needed. And then, I mean, there's all sorts of magic about what it means to be able to take care of that younger version of ourselves and offer them what we know to be true now.
Yeah. I'm curious if there's like for myself selfishly, and like for anybody who might be listening that's also can relate to that experience of these moments of this grief that feels like it's never going to end. And you can use me as a guinea pig right now, since I know we don't have a lot of time left. I would love to just land that on what would you encourage for someone to do in those moments, in those states? Like, is it reaching out to someone? Is there something I can do on my own?
Yeah. Well, I think
what would you recommend?
Both. And it sounds like you're doing such a beautiful job in becoming aware of the limits of how you've managed it before and trying to do something different. Like, the human spirit is so resilient and we have so much creativity at our disposal especially when we've done as much work as you have. But I think it can be really helpful to give the timeless feeling a location in our development. And what I mean by that is to hook the experience and the stories that come with it into a version of us that has felt that way before. So maybe I'll lead you through an example of this, if that would feel okay with you. And this would be something I'll do it with you, knowing I'm coming in with some rawness that I know is accessing a younger version of me too. We can do it together here.
Can I do it with you guys too?
You can do it. That would be the hope.
You're invited.
Yes, I'm part of the club.
Okay. So I'm going to work with the assumption that the sense of overwhelming emotion, and maybe in this case, aloneness and loss and grief, I'm going to work from the assumption that it's here and alive right now inside of us. But you might have a little bit more distance from it than when you brought it up a moment ago. So we'll just work from that assumption. And what I want us to imagine is that all of that, the overwhelming aloneness, grief, loss, and the sensations in the body that particularly come from or kind of fuel a story of it will feel this way forever. I want to imagine that all of them could flow into a younger version of you who is right next to you. And you might be able to notice immediately, how young does that feel? But if it feels like, oh, it's been here forever, it goes back to the very beginning, maybe you want to actually imagine like the youngest possible iteration of yourself. And as you do that, see if you can also remember that in your body, in the present moment, that you are who you are today. Remind yourself how old you are. Remind yourself what day of the week it is, what year it is. And allow yourself to remember that there is a you who is here right now, the one that I'm talking to, that knows all sorts of things about how to care for people who have overwhelming pain. This is a you who knows that there are people that you can reach for, and knows how you would respond if someone came to you with the bigness of that emotion. Perhaps allowing yourself for a moment to connect in with that place inside of you that feels loving, unshakable, compassionate, curious, wise, kind, creative, courageous. Sometimes it helps to bring to mind a memory of when you were one of those things, maybe remembering how you felt towards someone that you loved who was hurting so much. And then when we have that sense of that anchor in our adult bodies, we turn again to this younger version of ourselves who is saying to us, I'm overwhelmed. I will always feel this way. I'm totally alone. I cannot bear the bigness of this feeling. And maybe as you picture the version of yourself, it's kind of wordless, but you can feel the agony and the ache. I'm picturing what I imagine I would have felt like as a baby, feeling those things. And I want to invite us to move towards that younger version of ourselves with that tender, curious love that wraps ourselves around that feeling, allowing it to be there in its bigness and its fullness, but getting just enough distance from it that we remember that some of what is creating the intensity of this is that it comes from this younger version of ourselves who doesn't know that feelings have a waveform, doesn't know that feelings can be held and seen and witnessed, and then we'll settle. And so maybe we pick up this younger version of ourselves and we hold them close to us if that's what feels good for them. And maybe it feels good to say to this part of us, you can feel this as deeply and loudly and bigly and wildly and ferociously and consumingly as you need to. And I will be right here holding you. I'm not going anywhere. And we imagine asking this version of us more questions like, show me what hurts the most about this. And maybe we say, even when you feel that way, I'm right here. Even when it hurts this bad, and that's the story you tell yourself, I'm right here. I will not leave you alone with it. And we notice how when we are close to this part of us, we feel some of it in us too, but not in a way that's connected to the overwhelm. We can feel it empathically. We can feel the grief and the sadness, and we can feel it for and on behalf of this younger version of ourselves and for us now. But knowing that the sense of it going on forever and the aloneness can be resolved when adult us is present with younger us, and we are in connection. So maybe as a way of landing the exercise, I might remind this younger version of myself that you are allowed to be with me. I'm going to move on to another meeting, and there are things I have to do today, but you get to come with me the whole time. I'm not going to leave you. You get to come with me everywhere I go. And anytime you wonder if any of those things are true about you, you can grab onto my chest in the way that you did when that feeling got big. You can tap me on the shoulder. You can whisper in my ear, and I'll remind you, I'm right here. You will never have to be alone again. Not with that feeling, not in that way. And I like to imagine tucking my younger version of myself into my own body as if I hold her close to me. And as I'm holding her, she actually gets absorbed into me, living somewhere in my core. And that way I know that she never, ever has to wonder if she's surrounded again. There's nowhere she could go to get away from how much I love and care for her. And I'll take a breath to transition.
Wow.
All
Thank
the
you for that.
feels.
That was so beautiful.
All the feels. All the feels.
Such a gift.
Felt so good to do that with you, for me too, to remind myself of that.
It was really helpful for me, and I think will be really helpful for a lot of people listening. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you for the invitation, for your courage in naming what was so real for you. That felt like such a gift to witness the place where that pain lives. Thank you.
If you're listening to this right now and you feel particularly activated, I would just encourage you, maybe call a friend, maybe lean into some support. If you met a really deep part of you and it felt a little overwhelming, get a hot cup of tea, get under a blanket, something that can feel really loving to you. Hillary, what a delight it's been to be with you. I know we have to wrap. We're going to do a little hosts uncensored session for paid subscribers after this conversation. But you're such a gift. Thank you for offering your heart and your time and your love to us. I felt it so deeply, and the compassionate presence you are on the earth is so special, and it means so much to me. So thank you for your friendship and your love.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, Brady. I have so much love for you both. It felt like such a joy to be with you both in the middle of my day and to talk about this. I hope that, I hope it lands as well in you as it does in me, because I'm feeling really connected to you both and to myself leaving this, which is a gift.
Yeah, same. Really grateful. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you for spending some time with us.
If you want to find out more about what's happening with Soul Games, find us on Instagram at The Soul Games, or go to thesoulgames.com.
Would love your help in rating and reviewing the podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned to all future episodes.
Hey, and if you're loving these episodes and they make your life a little more beautiful, please consider signing up for the paid subscription of Soul Games, the podcast, or even donating through listener support.
Yeah, we'd love your support. All monthly subscribers will get access to bonus content, previous episodes, and be the first to know about exclusive upcoming opportunities to join in on the Soul Games community.
Yeah, we're really excited about the Soul Games community, where you'll have a chance to connect with myself, Emily, and others who are on a similar journey of exploring new ways to enjoy the game of life with a touch more soul.
Well, we appreciate you all so much, and as always, it's a pleasure to be with you.
We are your hosts, Brady Toops
and Emily Capshaw.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks. Love you. Bye.
Soul Games, the podcast, is a production of Soul Games Media.